Welcome to the 30-minute hour. It's the personal development podcast for the seven-figure entrepreneur who's looking to level up and become unstoppable. I'm your host, Eric Twiggs, your procrastination prevention partner. Joining me, you know him as the super CEO, the business strategist extraordinaire, and all-around good guy, Ted Fells.
Happy Monday. Happy Monday.
It is indeed a happy Monday, especially if you're trying.
Unless,
What's that?
unless your team was one of the teams that lost in the playoffs. So if you're a Detroit Lions fan, if you are a Baltimore Ravens fan, you had a great season, but it's not a happy Monday for you. So
It is not a happy Monday. No, but if you're a Taylor Swift fan, it's probably a happy Monday.
it's a great Monday. It's a back to the if you're Mahomey, look, Kelsey and company. Yeah, you're happy. If you're a 49ers fan, you're happy.
Yes, I mean, shout out to all the Swifties that listen to us. I know we pretty popular with the Swifties, so
We're very popular.
appreciate you. And
Scott, you'd be amazed, Scott. We are the podcast of the
absolutely.
Swift.
I don't, just a couple of moments here. I don't doubt it.
The podcast. They are all signed on. I'm telling you. That's right.
And we would love to have Taylor as a guest. I'm just gonna put it out there.
Love it. Hey,
put it out in the
open,
atmosphere. Let's see what happens.
We won't
I'm
ask
pretty
any
sure
questions.
I saw the
We won't ask
logo
any
on her
questions.
shirt when she was giving Kelsey that big hug. I'm sure it was the podcast logo.
Oh,
That's what that was.
That was
exactly.
That was it.
Yeah. Well, as you can tell, this is not your everyday podcast.
No. Most podcasts, your daughter doesn't just roll.
Right. You don't just have people walking in with
anything could happen here on our podcast.
Right. People just walk in like you're not having a podcast. But this is not your everyday podcast.
Oh, man.
Well, I tell you, we do things a little differently here, as you can probably tell by now. But in addition to watching us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube by typing in the 30-minute hour and going to our pages, you can also listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all of those places. But don't forget to hit the subscribe button, so that way you never miss an episode. Today, we're going to talk about the seven-figure CEO's secret to predictable success. That's right. You can get to the point where you've achieved predictable success for your business, and you're not feeling like you're on the treadmill, you're in the death spiral, you're some of these other things. We'll talk about what all that means. But my guest is an expert on achieving predictable success. So we'll go ahead and introduce him right now. He's helped nearly 20,000 new businesses and nonprofits. And with his business partner, they started and led their multimillion-dollar business through an exceptional and extended growth phase of over 10 years of double-digit growth. And that is just phenomenal. See, we got to talk about how he did that. And he did this all before he turned 35. Today, he helps founders and CEOs identify and implement the one essential strategy they need right now to get them on the fast track to predictable success. Please join me in welcoming to the 30-minute hour, Scott Ritzheimer.
Very excited to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome. Been looking forward to this for quite a while. I read the book Predictable Success years ago, and it was just a game changer for me. And as I've worked with businesses, I've one way or another either had them read the book or just on a subconscious level had them use some of the principles. So this will be an exciting episode. But I did want to kind of give everybody the backstory. Just curious, like, how did your journey as an entrepreneur begin?
Yeah. Game changer, just real quick, is a great word for it. We can overuse it from time to time, but it literally is about how the game changes. I kind of a joke about it, and it's one of the fun things that I get to do is brag on the book because I didn't write it. It's just one thing to kind of brag about your own book. It's another one to find an amazing book and brag about it. But when I introduce people, it's kind of like Les is the Morpheus of the business world, right? It's kind of like you start seeing all the glyphs. It just changes the way you see business. It changes the way you think about the challenges you're facing. And I've seen it happen time and time again. And that's exactly what happened to me. So rewind the tape back to the beginning. Long story short, I got a part-time job. The company that I got a part-time job was sold and owner financed about 3 months after I started. It was systematically but unintentionally destroyed over the next 18 months, repossessed, and then the founder, the original founder, called me and said, "Hey, we relaunch this company with me." And so there's a lot that can go into that, but just to kind of set the stage, I was not pursuing starting a business. That was not my goal and ambition. And in fact, I had just seen 18 months of just the ugliest underbelly of business. It just wasn't working. It was falling apart. Seeing something that someone had built just fall to pieces was a very painful experience. And that was kind of the impetus for me getting into becoming a founder and an entrepreneur. And as hard as that season was, it also taught me a lot about what not to do. It taught me a lot of things about how not to lead. I learned more in that 18 months than I did when I actually went back to business school later in my 20s. And so this is, again, kind of set the stage here. This is all coming to a head. We're relaunching this company in September 2008. It's not a great time to launch a business, right? It was, it's just, the first 6 months we were back in business, the stock market went down, I think 32 points or something like that. And businesses, there's this kind of mixed effect in that time. We were helping start businesses and nonprofits, and both of them are kind of sitting there wondering what's going to happen. And then you also had this influx of a lot of people starting new organizations because they had lost their jobs, or now's the time. And so really right out of the gate, we started to strike a chord with our clients. We started to resonate with them. And the business really did take off. It wasn't an overnight success by any stretch of the imagination. It was a long and steady climb. But it worked. It was kind of the classic entrepreneurial story from there. It wasn't a garage, it was a basement. We worked out of their basement for my co-founder's basement for several years. We actually stopped working there because we got kicked out by the HOA. And that was after we had kind of hid the fact that we were there by busing people in to the office just to make it work. It was like, why pay rent when we can do it here? And there's all kinds of funny stories from then. But the challenge that I had, and a lot of this was due to my age, but I've found that regardless of age, it happens to a lot of founders, is the first leadership team meeting I was ever in, the first executive team meeting I was in, I had to lead. Right. I was 21 years old, no idea what an executive team meeting was supposed to be. Right. I just wanted to go and do my job, and I wanted them to do their jobs. And someone told us we needed an executive team. That was the extent of it. And what happens is, especially as the business grows, you find yourself in more and more of those first time situations, and they feel less and less natural. Right? The first time you sell something, it's kind of hard, but it feels natural. It's like somebody valued what I do. If you're a consultant, the first time you consult, it feels natural. It feels wonderful. But if you're a consultant, the first time you have to have a difficult conversation with your admin assistant who messed something up, that doesn't really feel natural. It doesn't feel like that's why I started this business. And for me, and this is where that Predictable Success book comes in, that all about 7-8 years in really started to come to a head. And there were it felt like every day, most of the day was those unnatural situations, right? And it wasn't all bad, but it was just awkward and it was hard. And add to that, we were in this stage that's called whitewater. That probably doesn't mean anyone to anybody listening. We're going to unpack it here, hopefully in a little bit, but long story short, it's where leading an organization gets really hard again. And it gets really complicated, and things don't work like they used to. And what that translated what did that translated to into my world was, one, the nuts and bolts stuff, like revenue was harder and harder to increase, profit was way harder to hang on to. But the real hard stuff was the friends that were there in the basement with us, who were now our managers and our senior leaders. They were starting to max out. They were starting to underperform. And all of a sudden it's like, we've dealt with non-performers kind of at the front line before, but how do you deal with someone who's not performing, who's not only not at the front line, they're a manager and they're some of your closest friends? And some of the hardest challenges that I faced as an entrepreneur were those ones where me as a human and me as a business person would go separate ways, right? And which way is right, which way is wrong, I don't know. The pain of that, and especially in that whitewater phase, there's just so much of it. Again, I hope we can unpack whitewater a little bit, so this will all make more sense to folks. But just before we lose anyone to what could be the misery of this so far, we found a route out of that problematic time, right? When it was one of those almost all hope seems lost, I hear about predictable success on a podcast, and it's like, this guy's reading my mail. How does he know all of this about our organization? He's never even met us before, right? And so I go get the book. In the book, there's just this simple step guide on how to get your organization out of whitewater and into this stage. It's a literal business stage called predictable success. And when we did, we tripled our bottom line in a single year. We cut about $2 million of revenue from our top line and still made $1 million more on our top line during that whole process. It was absolutely transformative for us as an organization, so much so that actually changed the trajectory of my career. And led me on the path that brought me here to where I am today, where what I do is help businesses get out of that whitewater stage. I help them design and build scalable organizations so they don't have to hustle and grind their way to the next dollar, right? They can start that J curve. They can kick off scalability, and it's really a special process.
Yeah, now this is good stuff. Let's kind of jump into it. Let's talk about the different stages that businesses go through. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're having these struggles. You came across Les McCowan's information, the book on predictable success, where he talks about the different stages. Can you break down the different stages, and then we can kind of unpack what they mean and what you mean by whitewater?
Yeah, this is the full day hour, right? So we got about 24 hours. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Right. I'm just kidding. So let's run through them real quick. So the first one makes sense. You start a business, you're creating something from nothing. It's going to be a little challenging out of the gate. Not bad, but hard. And so that stage, we call it early struggle. And there's a whole lot here. There's a lot of support out there. There's a lot of people. The biggest challenge that I'm having with this right now is that how much we've glamorized early struggle. It's like it's idyllic to be a startup. The best startup strategy is to stop being one, right? Like you do not want to spend any more time in early struggle than you possibly have to, because when you're there, you walk around with what I call the entrepreneur smile, right? It's kind of like, yeah, how's it going? Good. It's like this, like you can see all the teeth, but it's a grimace, not really a smile, because it's hard. You don't know how you're going to make payroll on Friday. You don't know where the next sale is going to come. You've been told no more times in the last 2 years than most people would in 2 lifetimes. And so early struggle, it's really just about one thing. And it's sounds super boring, but it's so helpful. It's about finding a profitable, sustainable market. It's not about having the best product. It's not about having the best location. It's quite frankly not even about having the best team. It's about using your product, your location, and your team to find a profitable, sustainable market, to generate enough revenue from people who want to pay enough for your services or products or both to be profitable. And I want to pause because we understand why that's hard, right? It's kind of, again, kind of get the media hype away. Folks that are in it, they realize this is just going to be challenging. And then what happens is when we fight through that challenge, we get into the black, we find that market, and we start mining it, right? You start to tap into stuff, you get your sales and marketing working, and the thing like takes off. You can grow by 100% in a day. If the most you've ever sold in a single day, let's say you're selling water bottles, the most you've ever sold in a day is like 5 cases of water bottles. And you bump into a sports team that just had an issue and they couldn't get their water bottles. And they say, well, we'll take 5 cases right now. That's 100% growth in a single transaction, and so you'll get these kind of astronomical percentage growth rates early on. And when you do, that feels like the biggest win in the world, right? It might net you like $8, but who cares? Like that is a win. And so we just get real excited about it. We get real fired up about it. And that enthusiasm is what drives us to go and go and go and go. And we go into the second stage, the second growth stage. It's a very technical word. It is fun, right? And it's fun because it's not early struggle anymore. And fun, again, you'll see those rapid growth rates continue because we've got a relatively simple and a relatively small organization. And so, it's really pedal to the metal. Let's make this thing happen. And we're going to drive. We have jokingly say a boardroom is a ride in an elevator, right? We're going to open an office in Chicago. Why? Well, I met a guy. That's about all it takes. It's simple. It's go high centrality for like sales. It's a revenue game, and that's awesome. And it works really, really well until it stops working. And what happens, and this caught me so off guard, and I found just about everyone without something like the Predictable Success book, there's not really any other alternative than for it to catch you off guard because we feel like we've broken free out of early struggle. We're having success after success. You almost get a little Midas touch thing going on, right? It feels like whatever you do, somehow the last minute, you're able to steal victory from the jaws of defeat. And you make these ever increasing bets, right? We went from selling 5 cases of water bottles to a sports team to shipping 100,000 units to China on a last minute notice, right? Like they're bigger and bigger deals. And what's happening is throughout the entire organization, complexity is ticking up. Right? When it was just you, that's just a lot simpler than you and 50 other people. When it was just you selling cases of water bottles that you bought at the gas station and sold at an upcharge, right? That's a pretty simple supply chain. But now that you're shipping to China, it's a whole different ballgame. When you had 1 or 2 clients at any given point in time, and now you're sitting at, for a construction company, they're running 6 crews for 5 active projects. That's more complex. And the complexity in the business rises to the point where it causes us to cause problems. It's kind of like the teenage years of being a business, or you're a little smarter than, you're not quite as smart as you think you are, right? You might be a little clumsy with your feet still, but it gets clumsy. It gets messy. And the deeper you go into just this fight against complexity without knowing what it is, the harder it gets. And that fight with complexity is at center stage in that third stage of the process called whitewater. And it's kind of like, it's like you're in whitewater. It's just, you are bouncing around, hoping you can hang on. And you're just glad you're not the one on the front of the boat, and maybe you are the one on the front of the boat. And then you're wet, it's just hard. And so what's happening in this stage, again, it's complexity. It's kind of like going from playing youth soccer where it's flock ball, to playing D1 college soccer where you can't just all go chasing after the ball all the time. We need some structure. We need a system. We need some processes in place. And when you bring that structure and system and process and you marry it with the innovation and creativity that got you this far, that drive, that stick-to-itiveness, it's that combination that is the secret sauce. And that's what creates predictable success. It's that you have to have both the visionariness and the innovation and the sales and the revenue, and you also have to have the excellence and the drive and the sustainability. And by pulling those 2 things together, you can achieve predictable success. And what is predictable success? It's where you can scale to whatever size your market will allow, right? If you want to go from being a regional player to being a national player, you can do that in predictable success. If you want to go from being a national player to an international player, you can do that in predictable success. If you're a church and you want to go from 1 location to 10 locations, you can do that in predictable success. And so again, we get there by adding system and process. Now, what happens when they're in predictable success? Do you think all the problems go away? You know this, Eric. You've been around predictable success for a while, and Ted, you strike me as a guy who's been down this road a time or two. No, right? The problems don't go away at all. It's not panacea. It's not like it's all wonderful. And so what happens is when we bump into problems, what's the first tool we start to reach for? The systems and processes that have saved us in the past. And we increasingly rely on system and process. We increasingly look to and value the predictable side of predictable success. And what happens is slowly but surely, we become a little arthritic. We become a little over-processed, and we fall into the 5th stage that's called treadmill. And it's just, we're kind of there. We're doing our thing. Everyone's working hard. There's lots of people doing lots of stuff, and it's all important, or at least was important at some point in time. And we're largely successful. You look at the data, and it says we're doing pretty well. You look at how big we are now compared to how big we were, several years ago. It looks like we're doing okay. But especially like the founders, if they're still there, or the more visionary type people, they have this nagging sense that something's wrong, right? This isn't actually how we got here. We didn't get here by adding systems and processes. We got here by infusing our visionary risk-taking with system and process to hedge against risk. We got here by bringing both to the table, and we're just doing more and more system and more process and more stuff internally, and that's not who we are. It's not how we get to predictable success. The important thing about treadmill is that you can get back, right? You can get back to predictable success by getting rid of some of the extra system, by getting rid of some of the extra process, by taking some wise risks, some visionary risks, and that's what's going to drive you back to predictable success. We'll round this out quickly. If you don't realize, if you don't stop the train, there's only one way out from here. And that is that the organization will go into the 6th stage. It's called the big rut. And the problem with the big rut is everything feels fine, right? If you look at our little chart for it, it looks like this kind of precipitous fall, but it's not. It's a long, slow slide into irrelevance. And you ask an executive team, what stage are you in? You go through this whole thing, what stage are you in? If they're in the big rut, 9 times out of 10, 99 out of 100, 999 out of 1,000, they're going to say, oh yeah, we're in predictable success. We're successful. It's great. And they're not. They're slowly decaying from the inside out. And the only way out from there is the last stage. You mentioned it earlier. It's called the death rattle. And that's where the organization, there's some type of spark. We try and get it back. Maybe it's a new CEO. Maybe it's an acquisition. Maybe we're acquired. But the organization just doesn't have enough life left in it to survive. And it simply ceases to exist, at least in its current form. And so on that wonderful note, that's the predictable success life cycle. But what we're really trying to do as an organization is, like you mentioned in the intro, we're trying to get to predictable success. And so for many people, what's important is to recognize what stage you're in that's not predictable success right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop you right there. So those of you who are watching us and you've got a business, I'm just curious. I'd love to hear your feedback. You've heard about these different stages. Go ahead and put it in the comments section. What stage do you feel like you're in? Are you in fun? Are you in whitewater? Are you in early struggle? Are you actually in predictable success? So Scott, I'm curious, because I have a theory on this. Is it possible to avoid whitewater? Because I think the issue a lot of times is we don't build a model based off of where we're going. We build a model based off of where we are. And we start doing things that really aren't sustainable. So if you're thinking ahead, you could avoid whitewater to some degree. Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, quite frankly, from experience of having done this with a lot of organizations, let's say the same thing. The only way to avoid whitewater is to never get there in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. So the example I like to use is, when you get to whitewater, one of the challenges is learning to say no to stuff, right? It's learning to actually slow down your decision making. So kind of an analogy that I'll use for that is, at some point you need race car brakes for your business, right? You need to be able to stop just as much as you need to be able to go faster. But when you're kind of pedaling your bicycle in the early stage, if you put race car brakes on that thing, it's not going to be pretty. First, they're going to be way heavier than your bicycle brakes. So it's just going to slow you down all the time. And then the moment you tap those brakes, you're right over the handlebars. And so it's not so much that we're trying to prevent a stage from happening. It's not really true that you can skip a stage. The real secret is to know what stage you're in and run those plays as much as you possibly can until you find yourself in the next stage. If you can recognize quickly that you're in whitewater, you can adapt quickly and dramatically eliminate a significant portion of the pain. But when we try to prevent whitewater from happening, it actually tends to have the net effect of making it more complex and making whitewater happen sooner, or it just slows us down so much that we never actually achieve the success that's necessary to even get to whitewater in the first place.
So I have another somewhat controversial theory. I think like if you're in a business where you're great at doing it, I think it's easier for you to get, like, let's say a mechanic. Let's say you got a shop and you're a great mechanic. Your tendency is going to be to fix car. And then when there's only one or two cars here and there, you're right, you can just do that. But all of a sudden business picks up, you're going to have structure and process in place. So you're almost at a disadvantage. You're almost at a better advantage if you're not that expert, because it forces you to kind of build the systems around you. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a big point. Where this shows up in a lot of our work, the very first thing we do is help folks figure out what stage they're in, right? And because of who I speak to and being on podcasts like this, I tend to work almost exclusively with folks who are in whitewater and trying to get out. Now, what a lot of us feel like is you're that mechanic and you got someone else's goals, right? You think that you need to be $1 million shop, or you've got to open another location, or there's some version of trying to keep up with the Joneses, or like you're trying to build something other than what you want. And so you feel like you have to get to predictable success. It's just not true. And in fact, I would venture to say somewhere around 2/3, 3/4 of folks that are in whitewater can solve the problem of whitewater by just going back to fun, just simplifying it a little bit, right? If you love working on cars, then stop saying yes to the kind of cars that you don't want to work on anymore, right? Just say yes to the ones you want to do. And so that push back to fun is to say, hey, I actually don't need to scale my business to achieve the vision that I have for it. My vision is to do great work on cars for great people. That's my vision for it. That's all that I want it to be. And if you can do that by yourself or with a handful of people helping you out, then by all means, stay in fun. You can avoid whitewater by just never getting big enough to be in whitewater in the first place. So couldn't agree with you more. I don't think it's a wiring issue. I've seen lots of very skilled people overcome that and learn to be great leaders and great managers if they want to. I've also seen folks who would be great leaders and great managers fail early because they weren't willing to work on cars, right? So, there's both of those types of leaders have their challenges, and what you've really got to do is recognize not necessarily what your DNA is. I don't necessarily buy a lot of the fatalistic stuff. What you have to recognize is, what do you actually want? What do you want? What did someone tell you to want, but what do you want from your business?
Yeah, that's a key. You brought up a really good point. It doesn't get talked about a lot. That it is actually. So I'm always trying to go to the predictable success and the next level. I think Ted is kind of wired the same way, but for some people, you're right. It might be the better decision. Let's get back to fun. You got into business because you're at the hardware store. You just like talking to people. You like talking to Mary about widgets, and you like that. That's why you didn't get into this to have 8 locations and everything that came with it. So I think that's a key distinction, knowing really what you want at the end of the day. And Ted, definitely with all your experience in business, I'd love to loop you in. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely comes down to what you want. I mean, in your company, even as far as even like your staff, I mean, it's what they want, right? Like I try to, get with people and ask them what is it that you want? Where do you see yourself a year from now, 2 years from now? What does success look like for you? Right? That's really important, right? Because I may think, hey, you moving up the chain and becoming a vice president in the organization is something that's a big deal for you. And that would be a big deal for me if I were you. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a big deal for you. And so, once you start having those conversations and find out what's really important to you, then you may be able to find out what those drivers are to, motivate that person and, get the very best out of them.
Yeah. And I think like some people just aren't wired where they want to, just go to the extreme and have their foot on the gas all the time. They may just want certain quality of life. So that's why it's good.
Now they may want the benefits of it though.
Oh yeah.
Give me the benefit.
Yeah. You've opened up a whole thing there. Yeah. So, and again, we kind of use these stages for this. So you'll get the person who's like, I want a $10 million shop and I want to work on cars all day. I was like, well, like maybe, after you've built the team to get you there, you can get back to that. But you don't build a $10 million shop by working on cars yourself. Right. No. So what we're looking for, what we want that does not exist, our pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, is what we call fun plus. I want to do everything the way that I'm doing it right now. I just want to be 10 times the size. When you hit whitewater, it's not going to happen, right? It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, no, great points. Great points. So we've kind of talked about, okay, one of the ways to get out of whitewater is just to go back to fun. If that's, really get tight on what is it that you really want from your business. And you can get there without necessarily getting a predictable success. You can go back to fun, but then there's some that you want to get to predictable success. So what are some key steps that the entrepreneur who wants to get to predictable success can take to get there?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and I actually want to hit that. There's some tips and tactics, but I've been doing this long enough that I've realized those aren't actually the thing that changes it. The thing that really changes it is what happens right here between the ears of the founder, CEO business. You've got to recognize that you have to show up differently. You have to recognize that you have to value some things a little bit differently. So this is why that vision for predictable success is such an important piece of the puzzle. It's why the founder has to be wholly bought into this process. Otherwise, it's destined for failure. So what do I mean by that? It's not enough to have systems and processes, because there's not a great founder or leader who can get their organization to whitewater who doesn't think that there are at least some processes that are necessary. But anytime there's a new process, who do you think that process is for? Everybody but them. Right?
Oh.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we need a new process. And who's the primary violator of just about every process in the company, right? Okay, we're giving way too many discounts. What's going on here, right? And okay, we've got a discount policy. It's going to be, maximum 5% for clients who've been with us for 5 years or more. And then what happens the very next invoice that the founder does for his buddy who's been with us for 10 years? He gives him 8 points, and it's just like, and it's just right out of the gate. So your organization will not go to predictable success without you as a founder, as the owner. And again, that's why you have to do it. And if you don't really see that those changes are necessary, fully supporting, adhering to the systems and processes, valuing people who think in terms of system and process, then it's going to be one step forward, two steps back. And that's why folks get stuck in whitewater, is because they may read a book and follow some steps, but they don't change how they show up as leaders. You've got to stop exercising your skill. I call it the magic 8 ball, right? Kind of founders have this magic 8 ball where they just know. Yeah, you've heard that, I'm sure, but I just know this is the right thing. And your whole team is saying like, No, like we cannot do that right now. But just no. Well, if you play that founder card, that's not going to lead you to predictable success. Whether you're right or not, your hit rate is not going to be high enough over time to get you to predictable success. So the very first thing is you have to actively support systems and processes. The second thing is you have to stop exercising your skill as a decision-making genius, right? And take any ego or arrogance out of this. It's just what we're used to. As a founder, we've got to make decisions really quickly, and we got to make good decisions really quickly. Otherwise, you will never make it to Whitewater in the first place. So the folks who have what it takes to get to Whitewater, who excel through those earlier stages, they tend to have a nose for profit. They tend to have an eye for what will sell, but they overvalue their own ability. And they overvalue the data that they're getting at this stage. This is a really important piece to take it away from. It's not just some fundamental failing from you as a founder. If you look at what's happening early on, when you're making these decisions with your Magic 8 Ball, you're constantly getting input from clients because you're selling them, right? You don't have a client that you didn't talk to directly. You have your pulse on what's going on. You don't have a project happening on the other side of the company that you don't know about because there's only 5 people in the office and you could swing and hit any one of them because we're all in the same room. Like you're constantly getting information from all those interactions, and that's what you're able to take in and process. It's all happening intuitively. You don't know you're doing it, but you're able to process that and make great decisions. Well, what happens when you get a second sales rep and a third sales rep or a sales leader and you're not on every sales call anymore? You're not getting that client feedback like you used to. What happens when you get an operations leader, a COO, and they're handling stuff and they do an awesome job and there's problems and you don't even hear about them because they solve them? Well, you're not getting that feedback anymore. So what we have to recognize is, as a founder, as the CEO, especially if you've done your job right, you don't actually have enough data coming in to make great decisions by yourself anymore. And so you've got to, instead of being a great decision maker, you have to build a great decision-making team. And that's so big. And that's that when we're talking about systems and processes, we're not actually talking about SOPs for the front line. Those are good and helpful. What we're talking about are what are the systems and processes that we use to make high quality decisions as a team again and again and again.
Okay. And then so like the treadmill, so that sounds like that's a lot of times you get to a point when you're at predictable success, but then maybe you start to lose kind of the, I don't know, the mom and pop feel. And now it's a lot of structure and process and systems and this and that, and you gotten much bigger, but everything feels different from what it used to feel. Is that kind of a good description of the treadmill?
Yeah. And what it feels like is there's just no room for vision anymore, right? I can't remember the last time we launched a product and it really mattered. Right. We've launched lots of products, but they're rounding errors in our P&L, right? Like there's no need for a new client to have to fill out a 19-step onboarding process, right? Like they can come in, right? There's no need for one of our techs who needs to go out and visit a client to have to go through a 4-day van requisition process. Right, like just give the guy a van and let him go help the client. Like it's just there's something not right about it. And quite frankly, founders are a little allergic to it. So it's hard for a company to get too deep into treadmill when their founder is still there and they're still active, right? And so what happens is we need to start paying attention to that. Someone has to just raise their hand and say, hey, we don't need, this 19-step process, right? Actually, what we do need is I can see the market is moving in this direction and we need to start building. It's your point of building where it's going. That's where this is really important, because when you get to treadmill, there is so much organizational inertia that if you keep building for where you were, it's destining you straight for the big rut.
And it may be harder to keep some of your good people because they may have been around when it was fun, where I can go and walk and I can just walk. If something I need, I can go talk to Ted. Ted's the CEO. I can go talk to him and Ted will just make it happen. Where now we're on the treadmill. There's several layers between TED, and there's a process, and it has to get approved by this person. There's a lot of red tape.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of red tape. And again, the goal here is to use these stages, not necessarily to say we have done something wrong, but by doing the right things, we've overcooked the right strategy, right? Going back to Whitewater, we have overcooked the sales first, figure it out as we go, muscle our way to success strategy. And now we need a more consistent, a more stable, more structured approach. When we get up to Whitewater, or we get out of Whitewater, get into predictable success, we get to treadmill, we have that structured approach, and it is way too structured right now. And so one of the best ways to know, kind of where you are, it's a little tool I use, is kind of, what are your folks doing? Your best people, right? And hopefully they're not leaving yet, right? That typically, if you get to Big Rod, that's guaranteed to happen. But you can kind of see this early on. And when you look at folks who leave in treadmill, it's because they're sick of fiddling with stuff, right? It's just like, we're just tweaking little things. Nothing really changes. We're just kind of fiddling with things. You can lose great people back in Whitewater too. In fact, you'll probably lose somewhere around 30% of your staff going through that process. It's a really challenging time. And what's happening in Whitewater, your best people are firefighting. Right? They're not getting stuff done. They're just cleaning up messes all the time. And that's exhausting. They might be good at it, but it's exhausting. And so if you find your best people are firefighting, if you find your best people are fiddling with stuff, right, not really getting things done, those are two good indications that you might not be in predictable success. What we want our best people to be doing in predictable success is facilitating. It is helping the teams around them to succeed. And that's when you look at the hallmark of predictable success, when you look at what the best people are doing there, that's exactly it. They're helping their teams create more success, and they're doing it again and again.
Okay. Now this is a fascinating conversation. And I think it probably would be helpful to understand it for people to actually go out and get that book, Predictable Success, where it really breaks down the stages, in addition to listening to this podcast episode. I am curious though, shifting gears a little bit. You get asked questions all the time by business people. Like, what's one question you never get asked that you wish people would ask you?
It goes into this, and it's not fair, because it's not that I never do, but what's the question that I wish people asked sooner? It's the question of when, right? No one, unless they've heard a podcast like this, no one asks, what stage am I in? Right? They just ask, how do I solve my sales problem? Or how can we become more profitable? And what I wish people asked more, and why I do these podcasts and why I'm on a mission to tell as many people about these different stages as possible, is because I think that when is actually the most important question in business. Because if you think about it, why is helpful, right? You've got to have a vision for where you're going. But in Whitewater, it's actually how you're going to get there that is the secret, right? What are we going to do is an essential part of the puzzle, right? But if we don't have a vision for how to do it, it's not going to take us anywhere. There's the big, first who and then what. That's true when we reach a stage where we have to have a substantial change in our who. And so by recognizing what these stages are, it serves as a filter for every decision we make as a leadership team, every decision we make as a founder, what coach we go and get. Because the coaches who can help you in fun are different than the coaches who can help you through Whitewater. And they're different who can help you get out of treadmill. It'll change what we focus our big annual initiatives on. It'll focus how much we can drive our revenue this year, right? Because if you're in Whitewater, your ability to double next year is very low. If you're in predictable success, it's not crazy to think about doubling. It's not even crazy to think about doubling year after year. So the biggest question I wish folks asked is when. What stage are we in right now?
Oh, that's great. That is great. What stage are we in right now? So Scott, like, what's the next goal that you're going after, and what drives you to pursue it?
Yeah. I'm a little hooked. Like I found in this process of going through it myself, with as difficult and uncomfortable as whitewater is, I found I'm kind of made for it, right? I'm kind of like your whitewater rafting guide. Most folks don't want to be in whitewater all day, every day of their life. I love it. I love the challenge of it. More than that, I love the transformation that's available in whitewater. You'll see our story of tripling our bottom line is not rare at all. And so the ability for myself, our other scale architects, to find and help folks that are in whitewater, give them a name for all these challenges they're facing, and help them achieve the transformation that brings them to predictable success is massive for me. Unfortunately, I think predictable success is one of the business world's best kept secrets. And so my big challenge is I want to solve that, right? I want more folks to know about these stages, more folks to know about this really special book that can have that same transformative impact. And I'm on a mission to tell as many people about it as I can.
Awesome. Okay, so we're now in the final segment. This is actually Ted's favorite segment, Scott. It's called Write This Down. And this is where we each go around and share at least one takeaway from today's episode that we want people to write down so they can level up. So, Scott, you're the guest of honor. What do the people need to write down from this episode today?
Yeah, I would say it's that last point, right? What is that big question? The thing you want to write down on a piece of paper is, what stage am I in right now? And just keep coming back to that. Come back to it next year, come back to it in 3 years. If you keep answering that question and you keep picking the strategies that align with that stage, you will see yourself in predictable success.
What stage am I in right now? And that's a profound question. All right. Thank you. Ted?
My thoughts on that is, again, kind of piggybacking off of what Scott said, is once you determine the stage, then you gotta, get the troops, right? You gotta get the troops to, I guess be a part of the show, right? I mean, they gotta be bought into, where it is that where you're trying to get to. And I think that's my thoughts on that. So write that down. Gotta get the troops involved.
Got to get the troops involved. And so my contribution for this segment is, I think it helps to ask yourself a question of, is what you're doing right now sustainable? I think that can help you if you really think about that. And you may say it's not sustainable, but that's not the end of the world. But at least you're thinking ahead. It positions you to thinking ahead and not get stuck in whitewater like you would if you're just kind of going along. And even for myself with the podcast, at one point, I'm doing all the scheduling, I'm doing this and then, and I think I ran into a whitewater until I got the help of Esther, who is outstanding at editing and organizing all the stuff for the podcast and makes it easier for us to do what we do. But again, it was a trap for me because I actually like doing the things of the podcast, right? I like doing all these things, but it's very easy to spend all your time doing all those things if you're not asking yourself, is this sustainable? So I think that's something to write down. If you're an entrepreneur, is what you're doing right now sustainable? All right. Yeah, this has been a fun episode. So Scott, thank you for everything you shared and all the boulders of information that you've dropped. How can the people connect with you?
Yeah, Eric, Ted, thanks so much for having me. It's just a real pleasure being on the show.
Thank you.
Anyone who's watching or listening to this point, if you have not liked or subscribed to the show, you're in it to win it. Do it. Get more episodes. These guys are awesome. They're doing a great job.
Thank you.
And it's going to mean the world to them. So how can you connect with us? If you head on over to scalearchitects.com and just scroll down the middle of that page, you'll see 2 assessments that are really helpful. The first one, and really the only one I'll draw out here, is the life cycle quiz. So if you write that question down, you're like, hey, what stage am I in? And they're like, I don't really know. A great answer for you is, we've got a quiz that'll help you dial it in just a couple of minutes. You'll know exactly what stage you're in. You'll get this really helpful report that'll give you some tips, both on the tactics, how do you get out, and the team. Who do you need with you along the way? So scalearchitects.com, and you'll see the quiz right there.
scalearchitects.com. Check that quiz out. All right. Again, special thank you to Scott Ritzheimer, our guest, for sharing everything he shared. This has been a great episode. Speaking of sharing, don't forget to share the show.
Share the show. Share the show, please. Share the show.
Don't keep great information just to yourself. Don't keep it a secret. Make sure you share it with somebody. So that's our show for this week. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That way you never miss a future episode. And until next time, have a great one.